Now, the European Union is demanding compensation from any future UK government that pulls out of a new post-Brexit reset deal. EU diplomats privately call it a Farage clause, and it's aimed at deterring a future Reform UK government from tearing up the deal. Now, GB News understands that the clause would force us, the UK, to pay significant compensation if it withdraws from any future deal with the EU. Well, let's speak with the head of policy at Reform UK, Zia Yusuf. Zia, thank you very much for joining me. Now, look, some people would look at this and say, look, what's so bad about that? It gives some form of consistency. People understand what's going on. And actually, in the veterinary agreement, it would be it would basically slash red tape for British food and for exporters. So, in some respect, that certainty is a good thing.
It's a democratic outrage. That's what it is. Keir Starmer is very sneakily dragging the UK back into the European Union, which is already a betrayal and an insult to the 17.4 million British people who voted to leave. And in doing so now, he's negotiating something that the EU is literally calling, to the Financial Times, a Farage clause, which is a clause that would apply punitive fines on the UK if a future government of the United Kingdom chose to unwind Starmer's betrayal. And look, our message of reform is crystal clear. Our Parliament in the UK is sovereign. Nobody, including and especially foreign bureaucrats, will bind a future Reform government or Nigel Farage as Prime Minister. I want to say this too. If the European Union are looking for a Farage clause, boy, we will give them a Farage clause. How about terminating all welfare payments to foreign nationals, including EU nationals? British taxpayers, people watching this show, are paying £6 billion a year in welfare payments, just universal credit payments alone, to EU nationals every year. We'll stop that on day one. How about we ask Macron and France to give back to us the £800 million that the Tories and Labour have paid them to supposedly stop the boats, all the while Macron laughs at us, because every single year that this country has been forced to pay that money, what's happened? Illegal crossings across the Channel have moved to record levels. How about that as a Farage clause? You know, what we need, what this country needs badly, is a leader. We need a Prime Minister who's actually going to stick up and negotiate for British people, British citizens, not foreign governments and not foreign courts. And that's what Nigel will do as Prime Minister.
Well, some might say, though, that surely this would improve our relationship with the EU, and that actually that's all that Keir Starmer is doing.
It would improve our relationship with the EU in the same way, now, if you went to your bank and just handed them all of your money and said, I never want anything in return, that would improve your relationship with your bank. What matters is we need a government that is going to stick up for the interests of British people. Yeah, look, we want good trading relationships with our friends in Europe. Of course we want that. And we also want great trading relationships with lots of other countries too. What we don't want is all of the insane red tape. And how dare they? As Nigel said, it is a democratic outrage. These foreign bureaucrats, these EU bureaucrats, they despise democracy. The fact that they are already trying to bind a future government and calling it a Farage clause. And by the way, Keir Starmer is going along with all of this. We know he despises democracy too. Why? Because he's cancelling elections for millions of people in this country. That's why people in this country are so angry. They are sick and tired of our political elite, and I include the Tories within that, the Tories and Labour, the Uni Party, basically doing deals with supranational, international organisations, compromising the interests of the British people. That's why Reform has led over 200 opinion polls in a row, and that will change when Nigel's the Prime Minister.
Well, I was going to say, as you mentioned the Tories, I was thinking, well, it's not unusual for governments to bind us to things. So, for example, net zero, that was bound by Theresa May. She put that in. 2050 was sort of enshrined in law, which we are all following, irrespective of whether you voted for Conservatives and voted for it or not. So it's not unusual for governments to do that.
Well, and how's that gone now? I think you know the answer to that. How's that gone? Theresa May enshrined that into law. Remember, it was the Tories who did all of this mad net zero stuff to begin with. And what's happened? It's crippled our ability to compete on the world stage. It has been a unilateral economic disarmament, which, by the way, the Tories themselves admit. The current shadow energy secretary for the Tory party used to be called the net zero secretary, and now is running around basically telling anyone who will listen how awful net zero was, when they were the ones who were running around proselytizing net zero to begin with. Look, all of this is nonsense. We need a British government that sticks up for British people. And yes, in a world where President Trump is all about America first and is relentlessly looking out for America's interests at home and abroad, we need a British government that is going to wake up and understand what time it is in the world. If we do not, as British people, have a government that will represent us and fight our corner, we're going to fall farther and farther behind.
What if Keir Starmer sort of does the deal, but he does it till the end of the Parliament? Would that be more acceptable, seeing as we don't really have much power? He's got a massive majority in Parliament. His MPs are all frightened of losing their jobs or losing the whip, so they kind of follow whatever he says ultimately. And a lot of them wanted to remain in the EU anyway.
But no, it wouldn't be acceptable because we had a referendum, if you remember, and that was quite vigorously fought. You know, the arguments were litigated in public, and it was the biggest democratic mandate in this country's history, as measured by the absolute number of British people turning out to vote for something. And yes, therefore, it would absolutely be a betrayal of the British people. By all means, let's do great trade deals with lots of countries around the world. And by the way, can I point out the deal that Trump did with the EU, the sort of deal that the chattering classes in all the broadsheet newspapers who supposedly know everything thought that such a deal could not be done. He got that kind of deal done. Yes, we want to trade with our friends in Europe. We do not want to be ruled by them. We don't want to be rule takers from them. And I want to go back to the point that of this conversation, which is Keir Starmer is colluding with unelected bureaucrats in Europe in order to try to bind a future reform government under Nigel Farage. And EU bureaucrats are so shameless, they are literally calling it a Farage clause and saying it is a Farage deterrent. They're actually saying that to the Financial Times. You know, words almost fail me in this situation, but you know, hope is on the horizon. We need a reform government to change things.
Well, of course, with dynamic alignment as well, mid-2027, which is, I think that's when that will kick in, which means that then we'll have to go along with any changes in standards and rules, which then make it very, very difficult for us if we're bound after Keir Starmer's tenure has ended. That will make things very difficult. What will you do, though? Can you launch? If he signs it and gets on with it, then will you launch any legal action or anything like that?
Well, we'd have to look at that. I mean, we're already in the process, as you know, of looking to judicially review the attempt by Labour and the Tories to collude to cancel elections again for 5 million people, the same 5 million people. So our lawyers have already got their hands full. We're focused on that right now because that's the here and the now in terms of local elections this year. But of course, we're going to look at that. Look, we're going to fight tooth and nail every part. You know, Keir Starmer is clearly worried about his agenda being unwound when he's gone. Well, I'm afraid that ship has already sailed. It'll be unwound quicker than he knows it.
And I do keep hearing, so I interviewed somebody earlier, and he was saying that actually, even though we had a democratic mandate to leave the EU, that most people, through all the polling, have said that people would like to rejoin.
Well, here's the fundamental point on that. Look, the promise of Brexit thus far has been betrayed, hasn't it? Because what Boris Johnson did, the Tory Prime Minister, said we're going to, quote, take back control. And what did he do with that control? He, by his own admission, just threw open the borders and let an unprecedented number of people, around 4 million people in a short number of years, aka the Boris wave, largely from non-EU countries, largely to come here to not contribute and actually to be on welfare and to be dependent. So, of course, people are looking at that and going, that isn't what we signed up for. But look, democracy has to mean something. But Nana, look, I don't think Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister for much longer. I mean, you may have seen that there's already a Labour MP who is threatening to trigger a by-election if he doesn't row back on his attempt to rob British people of their right to jury trials. I mean, look, it's hard to even keep up right now with what Keir Starmer's doing. He's cancelling elections for millions of people. He's trying to rob British people of their right to jury trials. He's trying to ban X. He's presiding over a police force that is arresting and jailing people for speech crimes, particularly on social media at unprecedented rates, and pretty much tops every international league table in that regard. He's got an attorney general who is routinely attacking his primary political opponent. No sense of innocent until proven guilty for that attorney general. We're losing. It is almost the point where we're getting desensitized to how authoritarian this awful prime minister is. We've got to fight him tooth and nail, and the sooner he's gone, the better.
Yeah, it's an absolute shocker. Well, Zia Yusuf, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.